She walked onto that stage like a lost kid who took a wrong turn backstage. Quiet, stiff, eyes down, 13 years old, from a small town in the north of England that most Americans couldn't find on a map. Then the music started, and something happened, something that made 310 million people stop scrolling. The judges stood. The crowd lost its mind, and a record deal worth millions was on the table before she turned 14. So why, 7 years later, is she still fighting just to be heard? Heselden is not a place that makes headlines. It's a small village in County Durham, northeast England. Coal country, working-class streets, the kind of place where ambition is quiet because nobody around you is loud about it. No recording studios, no talent agents, no industry connections of any kind, just terraced houses, cold mornings, and people who work hard and expect nothing handed to them. That's where Courtney Hadwin grew up. She wasn't discovered at a performing arts school. She wasn't enrolled in expensive vocal programs from the age of 5. She found music the way a lot of kids find it today, alone, in her bedroom, clicking through YouTube videos at an age when most girls her age were watching cartoons. She found James Brown, then Janis Joplin, then Little Richard, then Tina Turner, and something clicked. Not just, I like this music. Something deeper, something closer to recognition, like she had been looking for a language her whole life and had suddenly found it in a 1965 live performance of a man who screamed and spun and dropped to his knees on a stage in front of thousands of people. She was 9 years old when she watched a young girl perform on Britain's Got Talent, just a regular kid, standing in front of a crowd that was bigger than anything she had ever seen. And that image planted something in Courtney that never left. By the time she was 12, she was entering local competitions. Nothing glamorous. Small stages. Small crowds. In April 2015, she auditioned for Teen Star in Newcastle, a regional singing competition, performing Bob Dylan's Make You Feel My Love. She reached the grand final. For a girl from Heselden with zero industry backing, that was significant. But outside of County Durham, nobody noticed. Here is the tension that runs through Courtney Hadwin's entire story. And it starts right here, this early. Off stage, she was painfully shy, quiet in a way that made people underestimate her, the kind of quiet that gets mistaken for having nothing to say. She struggled to make eye contact. She froze in conversations. Social situations were hard for her in ways she couldn't always explain. But the moment she stepped in front of a microphone, something else took over entirely. It wasn't performance. It wasn't an act she rehearsed. It was more like the shyness had nowhere to go once the music started, like the part of her that was locked up everywhere else finally had a door. That split, the silent girl and the explosive performer, is not just an interesting detail. It is the central fact of her life. Everything that happened to her afterward, good and bad, traces back to that gap between who she was in a room and who she became on a stage. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Have you ever felt completely different on the outside than you feel on the inside? Like there's a version of you that only shows up in certain moments, and the rest of the time you're just waiting for that moment to arrive? Drop that in the comments, because what happened to Courtney is, in part, a story about what the world does to people like that. She had the talent. Nobody who ever watched her perform doubted that for a second. But England wasn't ready for what she was. And that rejection, quiet, institutional, almost invisible, is exactly what sent her 4,000 miles away to try again on a stage she had never seen, in front of a country that didn't know her name yet. In 2017, a year before America ever heard her name, Courtney Hadwin stood in front of the coaches on The Voice Kids UK. She was 13. She performed Tina Turner's Nutbush City Limits, a song built on raw energy and physical commitment. She gave it everything she had, the kind of performance that, in any other context, would have stopped a room cold. One coach turned his chair. Danny Jones. Just one. Will.i.am didn't turn. Pixie Lott didn't turn. And in the logic of that show, 2 empty chairs out of 3 is not a warm reception. She made it through to the top 6, but the road stopped there. She was eliminated before the finale. Singing, and I am telling you, I'm not going from the musical Dreamgirls on her final night. A song about refusing to be left behind. The irony of that choice is almost too precise. What followed wasn't loud rejection. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of dismissal that doesn't come with an explanation. There were people, critics, viewers, commenters, who questioned whether what Courtney did even counted as real talent. The argument, if you could call it that, was that her act was more spectacle than skill, that the dancing and the screaming and the raw physicality of it was somehow less legitimate than technical, controlled singing. Think about that for a moment. This is the country that gave the world the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Amy Winehouse, a country with a direct bloodline to the kind of music Courtney was channeling. And somehow, a 13-year-old girl from County Durham doing exactly that, pouring raw soul into a performance like her life depended on it, wasn't landing the way it should have. Her family saw it clearly. Her talent wasn't being received the way it deserved in the UK. So they made a decision that no working-class family makes lightly. They would send her to America, to a show called America's Got Talent, a foreign country, a foreign audience, a production machine. None of them had any experience navigating, no managers steering the ship, no industry connections opening doors. Just a family from Heselden backing their daughter with everything they had. The weight of that is easy to gloss over. So don't. That's a family betting on something they believed in completely, with no guarantee of anything in return. And then, on the day it mattered most, the day of the audition, Courtney almost didn't walk out. Producers were informed backstage that she was too nervous to go on. She was physically sick with anxiety. They pushed her slot back. They waited, because whatever they had seen in rehearsals or pre-interviews told them that what was coming, if she could just get herself through that curtain, was worth waiting for. She almost didn't make it through. What happened in those final seconds backstage, and what finally pushed her out onto that stage, is something most people who watched that audition never knew about. She walked out, and the audience went politely quiet. That's the part people forget. Nobody screamed when she appeared. Nobody stood up in anticipation. She was a small, 13-year-old girl in an oversized jacket, hair down, shoulders slightly hunched. She gave her name. She said she was from Hartlepool. She smiled nervously at the judges, in the way people smile when they're trying to look calm and failing at it. Howie Mandel asked her what she was going to perform. "Hard to Handle," she said, by Otis Redding. The audience didn't react to that either. A 13-year-old from Northeast England singing a 1968 soul record on a primetime American talent show. Nobody in that building knew what was about to happen. Then the guitar riff hit, and Courtney Hadwin disappeared. What replaced her, the thing that took over that stage, moved like it had been performing for 40 years. Feet stomping, arms swinging, voice tearing through the room, like something feral had been let loose. The audience went from politely seated to physically on their feet inside 30 seconds. Not because they were told to, because they had no other response available. Simon Cowell's jaw dropped. His exact words, "Bloody hell, we're not scripted." That was a genuine, unfiltered reaction from a man who has sat in front of thousands of performers across decades of television. Howie Mandel didn't deliberate. He stood up, walked to the judges' panel, and pressed the golden buzzer without waiting for the performance to end. Gold confetti fell from the ceiling. Courtney stood in the middle of it, barely able to process what had just happened. Mandel told her directly, "You are not from this era. You're from a whole different era, Now, look at the numbers, because the numbers tell a story that the emotion alone doesn't capture. That night, more than 11 million people watched that audition on live television. Within 1 week, the clip had been viewed over 130 million times online. Not shared by a celebrity, not boosted by a paid campaign, just people sending it to other people because they couldn't believe what they had seen. By the time the season ended, the total view count had crossed 310 million. To put that in context, that is more views than the population of the United States. So why did it travel that far, that fast? It wasn't just the voice. Plenty of talented singers have appeared on that stage and disappeared afterward. What made this specific moment go viral is something more psychological than musical. It was the contrast. The human brain is wired to notice things that don't match. A quiet, visibly terrified teenager and a volcanic, untamed performer. Existing in the same body, switching in an instant, is not something the brain can just scroll past. It demands attention. It demands to be watched again, and then sent to someone else. That contrast is the whole story, and it's the thing that, ironically, the music industry would later try hardest to iron out. Stories like this one, where the numbers tell a completely different story than the headlines, are exactly what this channel investigates. If that matters to you, the subscribe button is right there. Courtney went on to perform James Brown's Papa's Got a Brand New Bag in the quarterfinals, Steppenwolf's Born to Be Wild in the semifinals. Each performance earned standing ovations from all 4 judges. Each one racked up tens of millions of additional views online. She made the finale. She performed Tina Turner's River Deep, Mountain High. She gave everything she had. She finished 6th, eliminated. She did not win America's Got Talent. And yet, within weeks of that finale, the most powerful names in the music industry were already calling. That's where the story gets complicated. In December 2018, the headlines were everything a 14-year-old from Heselden could have dreamed of. Psycho Music, Arista Records, a long-term recording contract. Simon Cowell, the most powerful talent broker in the history of televised music competition, put his name on the deal personally. Arista's president, David Massey, released a statement calling Courtney an exceptional talent with a voice and spirit well beyond her years. The music press covered it like a coronation. The girl from County Durham had done it. She had gone to America with nothing, and she was coming back with everything. That's the version of the story most people know. Here's what actually happened inside those sessions. Courtney was 14 years old, a 9th grader by American standards, sitting in professional recording studios with industry writers who had been hired to build her into something marketable. These were not people who had spent their teenage years discovering James Brown on YouTube at midnight. These were not people who understood why a girl from Northeast England would feel more alive channeling a 1960s soul singer than performing a polished pop ballad. They had a brief, they had a market, and they had a timeline. In her own words, years later, I went through a stage of everyone around me telling me what I should sound like and who I should be. I was working with writers who just didn't get why I loved music, and we were creating music that I couldn't relate to at all. Read that carefully. She is not describing creative disagreement between equals. She is describing a 14-year-old being systematically redirected away from the exact thing that made 310 million people stop and pay attention. The writing sessions were particularly revealing. She described being placed in rooms with professional songwriters and being expected to contribute, to open up, to be vulnerable, to produce something real on command with strangers under a corporate deadline. And when she tried, the subject matter they steered her toward had nothing to do with who she was. Her words, "When I was 14, getting put into writing sessions, being told what to write about, all I was able to say was, 'Oh, I love my dog.' It's just not great." That line is almost funny until you think about what it actually means. They took the girl who made a crowd of thousands physically rise to their feet with raw, unfiltered emotion, and put her in a room and asked her to manufacture feelings she didn't have yet about topics she didn't care about for an audience they were guessing at. This is not a story about villains. That framing would be too simple and not accurate. Psycho music was a business operating exactly the way the music industry operates. They signed what they believed was a commercial asset and began the standard process of shaping that asset for market release. The fact that the asset in question was a human being with a specific, irreplaceable identity, that part tends to get handled the same way regardless. Then something happened that nobody in that boardroom had planned for. By September 2020, Psycho Music was gone. Not restructured, not rebranded, gone. The label closed operations entirely, with staff either let go or absorbed into other divisions of Sony Music Group. The imprint that had launched careers like Camila Cabello, Grace VanderWaal, and One Direction simply ceased to exist, quietly at the height of a global pandemic, with almost no public acknowledgement of what that meant for the artists still caught inside it. Courtney Hadwin was one of those artists. No fanfare, no announcement, no transition plan made public. The label that had signed her with enormous noise dissolved in near silence. And with it went the infrastructure, the momentum, the release schedule, and whatever shape her debut album had been taking inside those sessions, she couldn't connect with anyway. She was 16 years old, and she was, in effect, stranded. The label was gone. The momentum had stalled. And for the next few years, almost nothing came out. Fans who had watched that audition video dozens of times started typing the same question into search bars across the world. What happened to Courtney Hadwin? Let's put the timeline on the table, because timelines don't lie. October 2019, Courtney releases her first official project under the Psycho and Arista deal. It is titled The Cover Sessions. 4 tracks, live recordings, Harry Styles, Lil Nas X, Jonas Brothers, Louis Capaldi, all covers, not one original song, not one track that sounded like the girl who tore through hard to handle on that AGT stage. The project was competent. Her voice was undeniable, even constrained, but it was not a statement. It was a placeholder, the kind of release a label puts out when they haven't figured out what to do with an artist yet, but need to maintain some kind of presence in the market. She was 15 years old, and her official debut was a collection of other people's songs. That same year, she was booked to perform at Woodstock 50, a major festival, a genuine stage, August 2019, in Bethel, New York, the site of the original 1969 Woodstock. The symbolism alone was striking. The girl compared to Janis Joplin, performing on the same ground where Joplin had become a legend 50 years earlier. It would have been a moment. The festival was canceled. Permit issues, production failures, artist withdrawals. It collapsed before it ever happened. Then 2020 arrived and took everything else with it. The pandemic shut down live music globally in March 2020. Every tour, every festival booking, every chance to stand in front of a crowd and remind the world what she was, gone. For a performer whose entire identity lived in the physical space between her body and an audience, this was not just an inconvenience. It was a complete erasure of the only environment where she fully existed. By 2021, a booking came through for the FM4 Frequency Festival in Austria, one of Europe's well-regarded summer music events. A real stage, a real crowd, a real chance to rebuild momentum. It was canceled too. 3 years, 3 opportunities, 3 full stops. And here is what needs to be said clearly, because the internet was not always kind about this period. The silence was not laziness. It was not a lack of drive. It was a teenager being moved around by a system that had no genuine roadmap for what she was, while simultaneously being stripped of the label infrastructure that was supposed to provide one. Most people watching this will never stand on a stage in front of millions. But most people know exactly what this specific feeling is. You have something real, something that is genuinely, unmistakably yours. And one by one, the circumstances that were supposed to give it space just don't. The opportunity falls through. The timing is wrong. The people around you don't quite see what you see. And you're left holding something precious that the world keeps finding reasons not to make room for. That's not a music industry problem. That's a human one. Courtney Hadwin spent 3 years inside that feeling. And then, in 2023, something shifted. It didn't come from a label. It didn't come from a publicist or a manager or a rebranding campaign. It came from Courtney herself, quietly, independently, posting a single word as a song title. Breakable. On February 24th, 2023, Courtney Hadwin uploaded a song to YouTube. No label, no press release, no promotional campaign, no carefully timed rollout coordinated between departments. Just a song posted directly under her own name on her own channel. It was called Breakable. The comments came quickly. Fans who had been waiting years for something original, something real, flooded the section with relief as much as praise. One fan mentioned Simon's name, referencing the label, the deal, the whole machinery of what had come before. Courtney replied herself, directly, no PR filter. It's all me for this one, completely independent, finally doing it my way. 5 words that carry the weight of 5 years. That comment was not a press statement. It was not a carefully worded response drafted by a team. It was a 20-year-old woman who had spent the better part of her teenage years being told what to sound like, what to write about, and who to be, finally saying out loud what had been true for a long time. She was done waiting for the industry to build a version of her it could sell. She was going to build her own. For more original songs followed before the year was out, each one written from personal experience, each one sounding more like the girl who discovered James Brown on YouTube in a bedroom in Heselden than anything that had come out of those Psycho Sessions years earlier. The person who made it possible was a producer named Kevin Bowe, Grammy-associated, veteran of sessions with Etta James and Joe Cocker, artists who understood exactly the kind of raw, soulful commitment Courtney had been channeling since she was 9 years old. In her words, he totally gets me and wants me to create the music I want to create. That sentence sounds simple. After everything that came before it, it is anything but. Then came April 2024. Courtney performed at the New York Pop's 41st birthday gala, a prestigious event held in Carnegie Hall in honor of Clive Davis. The Clive Davis, the same man Howie Mandel had referenced in that AGT audition room in 2018 when he compared discovering Courtney to Clive Davis witnessing Janis Joplin perform at the Monterey Pop Festival for the first time. 6 years later, she performed for him in person, in Carnegie Hall, independently, on her own terms. In 2025, she released her debut album. 7 years after that audition, she called it Little Miss Jagged. Not a comeback. That word implies she disappeared. She never disappeared. She was right there the whole time, writing, recording, pushing, waiting for the space to do it correctly. The industry moved on. She didn't. The album is out. The tour is happening. But the question nobody in the music industry wants to answer is still sitting there, unanswered and uncomfortable. What would have happened if the machine had just let her be herself from the beginning? Here is the pattern. Learn it, because once you see it, you will see it everywhere. A talent show finds someone genuinely unconventional, someone who doesn't fit the existing commercial mold. The audience responds to that person with a ferocity that surprises everyone, including the show itself. The clip goes viral. The numbers are staggering. A label moves quickly, signs the artist, and issues statements about how excited everyone is about the future. And then the process begins. Writing sessions with industry professionals who have a market brief, not a creative one. Meetings where the word accessible gets used a lot. Gentle suggestions, then less gentle ones about softening the edges, broadening the appeal, making the sound less specific, and therefore more palatable to a wider demographic. The raw thing that made the audience lose their minds gets sanded down, track by track, note by note, until what remains is something that could have come from anyone. Courtney said it herself. When you're that age and introduced to the music world, it's very big and scary, and you kind of let the people in the suits tell you what to do and how to do it. She is not the first person to say something like that. She will not be the last. Grace VanderWaal won America's Got Talent in 2016, 2 years before Courtney appeared. Golden buzzer, viral audition, record deal, and then years of creative friction before she eventually stepped away from the machine and began building something on her own terms. The details differ. The structure is identical. This is not a coincidence. It is a feature, not a bug. The talent competition system is built to find remarkable people. The label system is built to produce scalable product. Those two goals are not compatible when the remarkable person is remarkable specifically because they resist scaling. The tragedy of Courtney Hadwin is not that she failed. She didn't fail. The tragedy is structural, a system that could not hold what it found, so it tried to reshape it instead, and nearly succeeded. What survived is Little Miss Jagged. Raw, personal, rooted in James Brown and Janis Joplin, and a bedroom in Heselden where a 9-year-old girl found a language that finally made sense to her. That album exists despite the industry, not because of it. Courtney Hadwin is one of dozens of talent show artists whose stories took a turn nobody reported on. If you want to know what really happened to another artist the machine tried to reshape, that story is already waiting for you on this channel.